The most scientifically studied unexplained phenomena in human history is not Roswell. It's not the Bermuda Triangle. It's happening right now in the sky above a tiny valley in Norway. And it's been happening for well over 200 years. And somehow, the world barely knows it exists. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. This isn't a story about a single sighting. It's not a story about one witness. It's a story about 42 straight years of instrumented, peer-reviewed, multinational scientific study. Cameras, radar, magnetometers, antennas, laser trackers, all pointed at a phenomena that has made scientists from 3 different countries publicly admit in print that they don't know what they're looking at. I didn't know any of this 2 weeks ago, so I'm betting you don't either. Hang with me for just a little while and you're going to learn something mind-blowing today. And just a word of warning, there's one experiment they ran that I still can't wrap my head around. So stick around for that one. All right, today we are going to Hessdalen, which is a very small valley in rural central Norway, about 75 miles southeast of Trondheim. 45 minutes north of a little mining town called Røros. The valley runs roughly 7 miles long and maybe 2.5 miles wide. Total population of about 140 people, smaller than a lot of suburban cul-de-sacs. Steep evergreen slopes, frozen lakes in winter, short bright summers, reindeer. Nothing that should be interesting. No airport, no major military installation, no defense air traffic. Nothing on paper that should make the sky above this valley any different than the sky above any other valley in Scandinavia. But it is. Very much so. Since the 1930s, at the absolute minimum, and we're going to push that date way back here in a second, residents and scientists have observed glowing spheres of light hanging in the sky over this valley. Sometimes white, sometimes yellow, sometimes red, sometimes the size of a car, sometimes the size of a house. Sometimes sitting still for hours, sometimes moving at speeds we are not supposed to be able to move at. Sometimes ejecting smaller balls out of themselves, sometimes showing up as what witnesses describe as fully metallic floating objects. And everyone who has seriously studied these things, from skeptical Italian radio astronomers to a credentialed astrophysicist affiliated with Harvard, has said some version of the same thing. We don't know what this is. Which is strange because usually when a mystery hangs around for this long, somebody figures out the boring answer.
There was no alien. The flash of light you saw in the sky was not a UFO. Swamp gas from a weather balloon was trapped in a thermal pocket and refracted the light from Venus.
Hessdalen has resisted every boring answer anyone has thrown at it, and the story goes way back further than you would expect. Now, before we unpack this treasure trove of scientific insanity, I'm sure some of you are already asking, isn't this just the Norwegian version of Marfa? Fair question. There are a handful of famous ghost light sites around the world. Marfa, Texas, Brown Mountain, North Carolina, Min Min in Outback, Australia, the Naga fireballs in Thailand. But every one of those has at least a slightly plausible, somewhat convincing, conventional explanation. Marfa claims thermal inversion bending distant car headlights. Brown Mountain is mirages of distant lights plus atmospheric magnification. Min Min is marsh gas plus refraction plus piezoelectric effects from quartz-rich rock. Naga fireballs are disputed, but a lot of researchers think monks or locals are firing flares. Monks are firing flares? Good, reproducible, mostly convincing explanations. Case more or less closed. Now, Hessdalen. 42 years of continuous instrumented observation. 2,000 plus reports. Radar tracking objects moving at over 18,000 miles per hour. Rare earth minerals in the light spectrum, interactive laser response, metallic craft close encounters, documentation going back to 1811. Don't worry, These are all things that we're going to talk about, but I want to give you an idea of how out of the sandbox we are playing here. And there are a number of different theories as to what's going on. Together, those theories get you maybe half of what the lights do. The other half sits there, peer-reviewed and unexplained. Hessdalen is not the Norwegian Marfa. It is in a category all its own. So how cool is it that we have all these different light shows all over the world? Raise your hand if you'd go to every single one if you could. Yeah, most of us can't, but we can at least fake it digitally. And that's exactly what I use today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. With one click, I'm browsing from Texas. Another click, I'm in Thailand reading about the Naga fireballs. Another click, I'm pulling local news from Norway. And it's not just browsing. This is where it gets really interesting. With global server locations, you can unlock content from over 40 streaming platforms like Netflix and Prime Video. Different countries have different catalogs, so you suddenly get access to way more shows and documentaries that aren't available where you live. But the real reason I stick with it is privacy. CyberGhost encrypts your connection and hides your IP address, so your data stays private, even on public Wi-Fi. And with their strict no logs policy, not even they can see what you're doing. They've got 100 plus server locations worldwide, works on all major devices, and one subscription lets you protect up to 7 devices at the same time. CyberGhost already has over 38 million users and an excellent Trustpilot rating of 20,000 plus reviews. So it's one of the most trusted VPNs out there. Right now, through the link in the description or pinned comment, you can get it for just $2.03 a month plus 4 months free, which is 84% off. And it comes with a 45-day money-back guarantee, so it's completely risk-free. So yeah, you might not be able to travel the world, but at least you can make it look like you do. Now, while you're virtually globetrotting, let's hop back to Norway and take a closer look at those lights. If you search the web and read a quick summary of the Hessdalen lights, it will tell you that people have been seeing them since the 1930s. Technically accurate, but wildly incomplete. In 1811, a Norwegian parish priest named Jakob Toda Krog was newly assigned to the area, and he wrote in his diary describing what he saw above the valley. In the last days of the year 1811, a star with big shining brushwoods was seen on the sky. It gave away a huge glare. That's 1811, more than 200 years ago. Long before electric lights, long before powered flight, long before the word UFO existed in any language. When Father Jakob asked the locals about what he was seeing, they told him these lights appeared frequently. They had been for as long as anyone could remember. The priest thought he was documenting something novel. The community response was basically, "Oh, those. Yeah, we get those." 84 years later, in 1895, a local Norwegian newspaper called Fjelljom published a full article about the strange lights. The article went out of its way to distinguish what people were seeing from meteors, from fires, from any known celestial event. 19th century local press, in print, trying to figure this out. Then things went quiet. Not completely. It never actually stopped, but it wasn't until 1981 that the sky over Hessdalen turned into a full-blown media event. December 1981. A young couple named Olga and Ruth Mary Moo are out in the evening dark. They look up. They see what they describe as a burning fireball hanging in the sky. They tell their neighbors, and the neighbors look up. And pretty much overnight, the sky over Hessdalen goes from quiet to anything but. By the end of 1981 and through the first half of 1984, the lights are appearing 15 to 20 times per week. Not per year, per week. Some weeks, there are multiple sightings. Tourists start showing up on overnight bus trips from Oslo. Campers with cameras, journalists, skeptics. One Norwegian photographer named Leif Havik essentially makes a career out of camping in the valley and personally logs hundreds of sightings. In the summer of 1983, A small team of researchers, including a young engineer named Erling Strand, got approval to launch an actual scientific study. They called it Project Hessdalen. And what makes this different from your typical UFO case is that the institutional partners are the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment, which is basically the Norwegian version of DARPA, and what would later become Østfold University College. In most UFO cases, you get a flurry of media, then the military quietly shuts it down and it becomes folklore. Hessdalen did not follow that pattern. The Norwegian Defense Research Establishment actually lent them equipment, magnetometers, which measure magnetic fields, radar, seismographs, Geiger counters, infrared viewers, the works. From January 21st through February 26th of 1984, Strand and his team camp out in that valley and run equipment 24 hours a day. In those 18 days, they logged 53 visual observations. 53! With instruments, with multiple witnesses, with radar and visual confirmation at the same time. And the weird starts immediately. At one point, the team triggers a radio transmitter, and the phenomena vanishes at the exact instant the radio is turned on. Radar sometimes picks up objects that are not visible to the eye. Cameras capture objects that did not register on radar. Sometimes glow with no radar return. Sometimes radar return with no glow. Sometimes both. Strand publishes his report in 1985. His conclusion? We do not know what this is. We have multiple contradictory characteristics to explain, and it warrants further study. Which is honestly the most scientifically honest thing anyone has ever said about a UFO investigation. And it's the part of this story where the researchers take it up a notch because Strand is not about to walk away. Now, I want to slow down for a minute because the 1980s wave was not just lights in the distance. They were close encounters. A journalist named Arne Vist went to Hessdalen specifically trying to debunk this whole thing. February 11th, 1982, he's standing near Rohovde Mountain. He watches a light approach. In his own words, a star came toward us. It moved, he said, with tremendous speed. It grows in size and intensity, and then it stops, descends, and vanishes before he can take a second picture. He goes from debunker to witness to chronicler in the span of just one evening. And later, Vist sees the lights again with roughly 30 other people around. The lights pulsate and change colors. And then, as Vist describes it, a long oval-shaped light comes up the valley along the mountainside, stops, and slowly rotates. As it reaches the top of the mountain, it turns itself vertically like the way a rocket would sit on a launch pad. A local man named Lars Lillevold, out with the research team on a March expedition, watches an oblong object pass slowly in front of Finsehogda Mountain in broad daylight. Not a glow, an object. And before you tell yourself this is all the 1980s tourist bubble, I want to tell you one more. In 2003, a farmer named Bjarne Lillevold, who owns the land where the main research station sits, logs his 68th personal sighting of the phenomena. 68! In his own words, the light was strong, red, as big as the moon. It was rolling around its middle like a wheel is rolling. He said it moved slowly south toward the research station and then changed direction, then moved north and disappeared behind some trees. That was 2003, 20 years after the tourist wave had ended. This valley is still doing this right now. And if you think that's the strangest thing anyone has ever reported seeing in this corner of Norway, you haven't heard about the lake yet. We'll get there. The 1981 to 1984 wave was the tourist wave. By the early 1990s, sightings had settled down to 10 to 30 a year. Still a lot for an unexplained phenomena, but below the public's fascination threshold. Most of the world stopped paying attention, but the scientists didn't. In August of 1998, Strawn's team installs a permanent automated observation station right in the middle of the valley. This thing is a scientific powerhouse with cameras on fixed mounts, magnetometers, radar, and a trigger system that automatically detects, timestamps, and records anomalous events with no human required. They call it the Blue Box. It was the first automated anomaly detection recording system ever built for any unexplained phenomena anywhere on Earth. It has been running for 28 years and has logged hundreds of events. That kind of blows my mind. There's a piece of scientific equipment sitting in a Norwegian valley that has been quietly watching the sky for nearly 3 decades, building a data set on a phenomena that mainstream science largely says does not exist. And the data set keeps growing. In 1999, Italian radio astronomers from Italy's National Research Council get involved. They launch a program called EMBLA, E-M-B-L-A. They bring equipment that Strawn's 1984 team can't get. Radio spectrum analyzers, which scan the airwaves for unusual radio signals. VLF antennas, which pick up very low frequency radio waves, the kind that can travel through solid rock and water. Diffraction grating spectroscopy, which is a fancy way of saying they split the light into its component colors, which lets you read which chemical elements are glowing. And Doppler radar, which bounces radio waves off moving objects to measure how fast they're moving. And what they find is, honestly, stranger than what Strawn found. The phenomena, when it is glowing, can emit up to 19 kilowatts of radiant power. That's the continuous draw of roughly 200 100-watt light bulbs, lit nonstop, floating in the air, in a valley with no visible power source. And 19 kilowatts is a conservative estimate. Some of the higher estimates run well above a megawatt. 19 is just the number that the peer-reviewed literature lands on. Over one continuous 25-day monitoring stretch, they pick up structured, periodic, Doppler-shifted radio signals from the phenomena. Not static, not atmospheric noises, signals. Now, it took a long conversation with Grok for me to wrap my head around this one, so I'm going to save you the trouble. We all know the Doppler effect from sound, right? A train horn rises in pitch as it races towards you, then drops as it passes. Now, picture Bigfoot screaming and charging right at you, but before he gets too close, while he's still screaming, he suddenly backs up. Then he charges forward again, over and over. As Bigfoot moves closer and farther, the pitch of his scream rises and falls, just like the low-frequency radio signal the scientists picked up in Hessdalen. Except this Bigfoot was whipping back and forth at 6,200 to 62,000 miles per second. That's up to a third of the speed of light. The spectrum analysis broke down the light into its chemical components: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Okay, so far, that's air. Then silicon, iron, titanium, and scandium. Scandium is a rare earth mineral. The electrical engineer who led the spectral work, a guy named Björn Gitle Hauge, said it himself. It was very, very surprising to find scandium in it. Why is scandium weird? Because thortveitite, the mineral that actually contains scandium, was first discovered in Norway. This rare earth fingerprint in the light spectrum lines up with the mineral geology directly beneath the valley. Whatever is glowing up there is apparently pulling trace elements out of the ground and lighting them up in the sky. High-resolution observations also showed something else. What looks like one big ball of light to your naked eye is often actually made of many smaller points, each vibrating around a common center of mass. Like a flock of birds in tight formation, where each bird is a glowing dot and the whole flock moves as one coordinated unit. The balls eject smaller balls. They change shape, they split, they recombine. And a few years into the EMBLA work, the team runs an experiment that nobody had ever tried before. I promise I will come back to it. Just keep holding that thought, because first we need to make a little side trip to a lake just outside of Rorros that has something insane sitting at the bottom. But before I tell you what's below the surface, I need to tell you what happened above the surface in the skies over Scandinavia 1 year earlier. 1946, Scandinavia experiences something called the ghost rocket wave. Between February and December of that year, approximately 2,000 sightings are reported across Sweden, Finland, and Norway. The objects are described as silent, metallic, and cigar-shaped, often trailing smoke. They fly in ways that captured German V-2 rockets can't. They maneuver, bank, and change direction. Several are reported to have crashed into lakes. The peak of the activity is August 1946. The Swedish Defense Staff publicly acknowledges on October 10th of that year that some of the sightings cannot be explained as natural phenomena, Swedish aircraft, or Soviet weaponry. Fast forward a year. Roughly 17 miles northwest of Hessdalen sits a lake called Djupsjön. In early August of 1947, about a year after the ghost rocket wave peaked, and about a month after the Roswell incident, a farmer named Bernhard Sulia is working the hay with his farmhand Harald Engvik. They watch an egg-shaped object descend toward the lake. Loudly. It sounds like a jet engine, and it's moving fast. And right before it hits the water, it executes a perfect 180-degree turn, the way something with a pilot turns. And then it drops into the lake, and it does not come back up. The lake is searched at the time with the resources available, which in rural Norway in 1947 is essentially a few farmers in a couple of rowboats looking down into the water. The story gets written down. It gets passed around. It becomes local legend. 77 years later, from February 19th through the 24th of 2024, the Norwegian UFO Center, led by researcher Rune Rostad, organized one of the largest civilian search operations in Norwegian history. They called it Operation Arctic Seal. They descend on Djupsjön with sonar, remote-operated subs, and professional divers from a company called Subsea Fossen. The lake was frozen. They cut through about 2.5 feet of ice. Now, just a little aside here. If you're like me, the first thought that came to my head was, why did they do this in winter when it's cold and they have to cut through the ice? Turns out that when you have this kind of an operation using divers and submersibles and stuff, they actually prefer the ice. I guess it's much easier to put up with the cold, but have a solid, stable surface to send stuff into the water than to launch everything from boats. I never would have guessed that in a million years. Anyway, Major Randolph Strømsnes of the Royal Norwegian Air Force visits the site. 2 F-35 fighter jets fly over the lake during the operation. And sonar hits something hard, buried in about 18 inches of mud. Under the mud is a layer of clay packed so hard that the divers can't even push a knife through it. And under that clay cap is an object roughly 46 feet long and 10 feet wide. Unfortunately, Operation Arctic Seal did not recover the object. No photographs have been released and no identification has been made. It could be Soviet-era debris from the ghost rocket wave. Could be a sunken boat. Could be a geological anomaly. But the Norwegian Air Force thought it was worth sending F-35s over. And 17 miles down the road in Hessdalen, the sky kept doing what the sky in Hessdalen does. So, that's the story. 200 years of sightings. A permanent automated observatory logging data since 1998. Italian radio astronomers picking up rare earth metals and structured radio signals. A lake with something buried in it. And I still have not gotten to the strangest experiment that they ran. I could stop here, roll the credits, tell you this is the greatest scientific mystery you've never heard of, and call it a day. But that is not what we do on this channel. Because if Hessdalen is real, Whatever is real has to survive a real fight. And the skeptics have some pretty good punches to throw. Italian engineer Jader Monari mapped the geology of the valley. And what he found is pretty interesting. The western slope contains iron and zinc ore. The eastern slope is rich in copper sulfide ore. And running between them is a river called the Hessia, which picks up sulfuric acid from drainage out of the old Roros copper mines, which operated from 1644 until 1977. That acid makes the river electrically conductive. And buried underneath the whole thing is a dark blob of igneous rock called a gabbro intrusion that forms when magma cools slowly underground. It is laced with sulfide mineralization, which functions as a conductor tying everything together. It's not that the gabbro itself is making the lights. It's that the gabbro is the underground wiring that lets the valley function as one big electrochemical cell instead of two unrelated ore bodies sitting on opposite hillsides. Monari's hypothesis is that the entire valley is a giant natural battery. Greek researchers at Aristotle University mapped a conductive zone at roughly 4 miles by 7.5 miles, which lines up almost exactly with that gabbro intrusion under the valley. So maybe what people are seeing is just atmospheric electricity cooked up by a valley-sized natural battery discharging into the sky. Two Brazilian researchers, Gerson Paiva and Carlton Taft, proposed something a little more specific. They say the lights are something called dusty plasma. Plasma is just the fourth state of matter, like lightning or the glow inside a neon sign. Dusty plasma is plasma that has picked up charged dust particles. Those particles can organize themselves into structures, sometimes really pretty geometric structures. The whole thing glows, and it can hold itself together for surprisingly long stretches. So how do you get plasma in the middle of a Norwegian valley? Radon gas. Radon seeps up out of the mineral-rich valley floor. As it decays, it produces alpha particles, which ionize the air around them. The dust comes from centuries of accumulated mining dust drifting down from the Roros copper works. Radon plus mining dust equals a natural dusty plasma factory. And there is a third explanation. Quartz-rich rock under tectonic stress actually generates voltage. This is a real physical effect. It's called piezoelectricity, and it is the same reason your grill lighter works. Hessdalen sits on geologically active substrate. Microfracturing in the bedrock could produce localized high voltage events. That voltage creates a strong electric field that ionizes the air around it, stripping electrons off air molecules. When things start to settle back down and those electrons recombine with the ions, they release energy as photons, which is the glow you can see. It's the same mechanism now widely accepted for earthquake lights, which used to be considered paranormal and are now understood as real atmospheric electricity. Okay, that theory seems somewhat plausible. Remember that light spectrum analysis that found scandium in the mix? The rare earth metal the Italians were so surprised to see in the light spectrum? Skeptics have a pretty easy answer for that one. The Roros copper works operated for 333 years. The valley air carries centuries of accumulated mining dust, which contains exactly the trace minerals that show up in the emission spectrum. An ordinary atmospheric discharge passing through that dust would ionize those metals and produce exactly the same emission lines. The scandium isn't evidence of an anomalous object. It's evidence of an ordinary discharge passing through unusual air. In the 1981 to 1984 wave, where sightings jumped from 15 or 20 per week, skeptics point out that wave started at the same time media coverage started. When hundreds of amateur observers are camped out in a Norwegian valley on long winter nights, somebody is going to see something they interpret as weird, even if it's really satellites or planes or planets. The wave may be partially a self-amplifying tourist event. And even the wave clustering over centuries argument has an answer. Every single historical wave correlates with a moment when someone was paying attention. In 1811 is when Krogh arrived and started writing. 1895 is when the local newspaper decided the story was worth printing. 1981 is the modern tourist surge. The clustering may be entirely because somebody looked up, saw lights, and started getting everyone else to look up. And then there's the blue box, the permanent automated station, the one that has been logging data for 28 years. The one I told you was a triumph of persistent science. The skeptics say, not so fast on this one too. The blue box is a trigger-based system. By design, it only records events its centers classify as anomalous. That means the entire public dataset is a dataset of anomalies. There is no clean published baseline showing how often the system records mundane phenomena for comparison, which means we cannot actually tell just how weird Hessdalen is compared to any other random Norwegian valley. And one last little tidbit about the quote we shared from the parish priest, Jakob Toda Krogh, about the bright light he saw in the sky. As it turns out, 1811 is notable in astronomy history for the comet of 1811. This thing was as bright in the night sky as the largest stars, with a super long tail that stretched from 25 to 45 degrees across the sky. To put that into perspective, that's anywhere from 2.5 to 5 times longer than the tail on Halley's Comet on its flyby in 1986. So, was good old Father Jakob seeing the Hessdalen lights or the comet of 1811? We will never know. So, take all of that, add it up. A natural battery, dusty plasma from radon and mining dust, piezoelectric discharges from quartz under stress, a 333-year dust supply that explains the scandium, observer amplification in the tourist wave clustering that tracks human attention, not anomalous activity, and a scientific instrument that was designed to record only weird things. If you took just those arguments, you could walk away from this video believing Hessdalen is an interesting geological curiosity that has been overhyped by 40 years of atmospheric drama. And that would be a perfectly defensible place to land. Except there's a residue. Some things survive the hammer, and that residue is the reason I made this video. The tourist amplification argument is strong for the 1980s wave. It is not strong for anything that happened before radios existed. Krogh wrote his diary entry in 1811. Even if he was only seeing a comet, doesn't change the fact that everyone in the area told him those lights had always been there for as long as they all could remember. That predates the modern tourist wave by 170 years. The Fjellhjelm newspaper article ran in 1895. That predates the modern tourist wave by 86 years. And in both cases, when the writers asked the locals said the lights had been there as long as anyone could remember. You cannot explain 200 years of multi-generational community memory with tourist bias. The tourists weren't there yet. The tourists weren't even born yet. And the witnesses in this story are not the usual UFO convention crowd. Arne Vist was a journalist who went to Hessdalen specifically to write a debunking piece and came back a true believer. Bernhard Sullia, the farmer at Upsjøen, went on to serve as mayor of Røros. Local farmers who know the area. Trained engineers tracking objects on radar that their own eyes could not see. These are not people with a history of reporting ghost encounters. These are people who are going about their daily lives when something refused to behave like it was supposed to. Now I want to talk about the radar tracking of signals moving at insane speeds. We already talked about the low frequency sound waves traveling at upwards of 1/3 the speed of light. But those aren't the only insanely fast things flying around the valley. There are visible lights seen on regular radar that hit speeds of over 18,000 miles per hour. The skeptics will say radar artifacts are common. Birds, weather clutter, ion disturbances, plasma from the valley's own geology. And an object transitioning from stationary to 18,000 miles per hour inside a valley would require accelerations that should tear it apart and produce a shockwave. Absence of that shockwave means either the object has no meaningful mass, which is not normal, or the radar track is an artifact. Occam's razor would then tell you it's radar artifacts. Okay, you get one artifact, you throw it out. Easy. Except multiple independent teams across multiple years using separately calibrated equipment keep getting velocity returns that should not exist. The highest measured velocity on one of those tracks was approximately 18,600 miles per hour. Let me translate that. That is Mach 24. That is about 5 miles per second. It is faster than a rifle bullet by a factor of 10. It is faster than the International Space Station, which has to move at roughly 17,100 miles per hour to stay in orbit. The Hessdalen tracks, at their peak, are faster than orbital velocity inside a 7-mile-long valley. The skeptics are right when they say a solid object moving that fast through the lower atmosphere should generate a supersonic shockwave. It should leave a glowing ion trail. It should heat the air around it enough to burn on infrared like a comet. The Hessdalen lights, when they do this, do it silently. Either the object has no meaningful mass, which is very weird, or the radar is systematically wrong across multiple independent teams from multiple countries using different equipment. And that second option, honestly, is harder to believe than the first one. And now, the experiment I promised I would come back to. Somewhere in the early 2000s, during the Italian Embla fieldwork, the team decided to try something nobody had done before. They aimed a laser at one of the light balls while it was active. Not a big laser, not a military-grade laser. A helium neon laser. The kind of red laser pointer you would use for a PowerPoint presentation to point at something on the screen. Less than 1 milliwatt of power. A toy. Compared to a 19 kilowatt glowing sphere, it's essentially nothing. But the ball responded. Arling Strand described the test as, once, we used laser to point to the phenomena when it showed up, and it reacted. It was at that time a flashing light, and when we pointed the laser beam to it, it changed the flashing frequency. It doubled the flashing frequency. And we take it down again, and it went back to regular flashing. And we did this test 9 times, and 8 of those 9 times it changed the flashing. 9 trials, 8 responses. This is not observer amplification. This is not mining dust. This is not a coincidence. This is an interactive response to a specific, repeatable input. Laser on, pulse rate doubles. Laser off, pulse rate returns to normal. Laser on again, pulse rate doubles again. 8 out of 9 times. A chemical process does not do this. A plasma cloud does not do this. A charged dust cluster does not do this. A battery does not do this. Piezoelectric discharge absolutely does not do this. The only things in nature we know of that respond to a directed signal like this are electronic receivers and living organisms. That's it. Which brings us to Dr. Massimo Teodoranti. Teodoranti is the principal Italian researcher on Embla. He has a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Bologna. He's currently listed as an affiliate of the Galileo Project, the Harvard initiative founded by Avi Loeb to search for evidence of extraterrestrial technological civilizations. Not fringe, credentialed. Before anyone gets carried away, let me be very clear about what Teodrani is proposing. He's not saying this is aliens. What he is saying is, in my opinion, even weirder and way cooler. He is saying that plasma, hot ionized gas, may, under the right conditions, exhibit self-organizing properties that are thermodynamically indistinguishable from what we normally call life. His argument, which he has published in peer-reviewed outlets, is that plasma systems can display what he calls memory marks. They can self-duplicate like a dividing cell. They can do metabolic like energy processing, meaning they pull in energy from whatever's around them, like the atmosphere or electrical fields, and use it to keep going and change shape, like how a living cell burns sugar fuel to stay alive. And if that doesn't sound crazy enough, I'm not done. In research done between 2004 and 2007, a Russian plasma scientist named Vadim Tsitovich was able to see, through computer modeling, the charged dust particles arrange themselves into double helices, as in the same shape as DNA. I know computer modeling is not real life, but other plasma experiments have documented the dust organizing into strings and single helices. And observers at Hessdalen have seen geometric patterns and shapes within some of the plasma bubbles. In plain English, plasma, in certain configurations, might behave a little bit like a brain, or a little bit like a single-celled organism. Not carbon-based, not eating sugar, but in some real measurable sense, alive. And Teodrani's proposal is that Hessdalen may be the closest thing Earth has to a persistent natural laboratory for actually observing it. Is he right? I have no idea. This is not mainstream scientific consensus. Mainstream plasma physicists regard the hypothesis as speculative. He might be wildly, catastrophically wrong. But here's what I keep coming back to. Let me lay out what a working theory of Hessdalen has to explain. All at once. The phenomena responds to a laser by changing its pulsation. It ejects smaller units of itself. Those smaller units behave coherently. The whole object vibrates around a shared center of mass. It sometimes selectively avoids detection when electromagnetic transmitters turn on. It sometimes emits so much radiant power that no known conventional mechanism cleanly accounts for it. It returns velocity tracks on multiple independent radars that should not be physically possible. It sometimes takes the form of what witnesses describe as a solid, rotating metallic object. And it has been doing all of this in the same place for at least 215 years. The geology explanations account for maybe half of the list. Maybe more than half. I'll give him that. Teodrani's hypothesis is the only one on the table that even tries to account for the whole list at once. He could be wrong, but nobody else is even trying. And here's what most Hessdalen coverage does not tell you, because most Hessdalen coverage is out of date. On March 9th of 2023, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, a United States-based group of scientists working on unidentified anomalous phenomena, announced a formal partnership with Project Hessdalen. That partnership is active. Project Hessdalen formalized as a nonprofit the same year. The Harvard Galileo Project lists Hessdalen as a key long-term study site. Teodrani is affiliated with both. Greek researchers at Aristotle University are expanding the low-frequency radio mapping. A new geomagnetic variometer, which is an instrument that measures tiny changes in Earth's magnetic field, now sits in the valley correlating magnetic shifts with observed light events. The baseline is holding steady at 10 to 30 events per year. So, keep an eye on 3 things over the next couple of years. First, The Galileo project's new instrumented observatories. They are rolling out in multiple locations, Hessdalen being one of them. If any one of them captures a high-resolution, full-spectrum, multi-sensor recording of a light bulb doing what Teodorini predicts, we will have the cleanest piece of evidence ever captured for a non-conventional aerial phenomena. Second, whatever's under Lake Upschuan. If somebody actually ever recovers and identifies that 46-foot object buried under the clay cap, it changes the conversation about Scandinavian UAP history permanently. Third, the next wave. Hessdalen activity is cyclical. 1946 was a wave. 1981 to 1984 was a wave. Smaller waves have been reported in the 90s and early 2000s. If the pattern holds, the next significant spike could arrive in the next 5 to 10 years. And this time, unlike 1981, the researchers will already have the blue box, the Italian instruments, the Greek surveys, the geomagnetic variometer, the Galileo sensors. All of that is already in place and watching. Honestly, when I started researching this video, I thought Hessdalen was going to be a fun Norwegian ghost light story with a tidy plasma explanation at the end. And then I ran it through the skeptic gauntlet. And I want to tell you where that left me because it did not leave me where I expected. The geological explanations are real. The battery works, the dusty plasma works, the piezoelectric discharges work. The 333-year mining dust explains a lot. The 1981 to 1984 tourist amplification was probably a real effect. All of that is true. But even after all that, it doesn't change the fact that the lights predate the tourists by almost 2 centuries. The witnesses include debunkers and trained engineers. The radar tracks cross-confirm across multiple teams and multiple decades. And when researchers pointed a 1 milliwatt red laser pointer at the phenomena, it changed its pulsation rate 9 times out of 9 attempts, with 8 returning to normal when the laser turned off. No battery does that. No plasma cloud does that. No rock under stress does that. I don't know what's making the lights. The battery theory gets part of it. The dusty plasma theory gets part. The piezoelectric theory gets part. Together, they get you maybe half of what the lights actually do. If you want to call the rest of it extraterrestrial, I can't prove you wrong. If you want to call it natural and just poorly understood, I can't prove you wrong. If you want to call it proto-life, I can't prove you wrong either. Something is happening over that valley. Nobody can say with certainty what it is. The data are not going away. The priest wrote about it. The newspapers wrote about it. The Norwegian military chased it. The engineers measured it. The Italians spectrographed it. And the Greeks mapped its radio emissions. And right now, tonight, there's a very real possibility that somewhere over the Hessdalen Valley, a glowing ball of something is sitting in the air, pulsing with no power source anyone has identified, emitting scandium lines, and waiting for someone with a laser pointer to come along and ask it a question. Big thanks to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video. If you want to stay protected online and unlock more content worldwide, check out the link below. You'll get 4 months free and a 45-day money-back guarantee so you can try it risk-free. This case blows my mind just because I'm pretty confident not too many people even know about it. Maybe if the future wave they're expecting starts ramping up, I might need to pull up my parka and head on up there. But until that happens, you can certainly keep yourself busy with this amazing episode right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.